We are about to uncover a lesser-known story in which a single, enigmatic leader changed the course of history in the 20th century. Behind the victories and conquests that get all the attention are the mistakes that changed the course of history in unexpected ways. Journey with us through overlooked battles, the dangerous underestimation of adversaries, and the profound price of unchecked ambition. These seemingly inconspicuous missteps collapsed an empire on the cusp of unparalleled dominance. Curious about the mastermind behind these decisions? Eager to unearth these game-changing errors? Step inside and let the story unfold. Hitler's ambitions and rise to power. Amid the sprawling aftermath of the First World War, a tempest of political unrest, societal upheaval, and economic despair swirled through the corridors of Germany. This setting was the perfect crucible for the emergence of a figure who would shape not only the destiny of a nation, but also the trajectory of global history: Adolf Hitler. To understand Hitler's rise, we must first step into the tumultuous backdrop of post-WWI Germany. The Treaty of Versailles had left the nation humiliated, economically hamstrung, and socially fractured. Hyperinflation ravaged people's savings, bread queues meandered through streets, and a once proud nation was searching for identity, direction, and, most critically, leadership. Enter Hitler, a man with a vision and a dream to restore Germany to its former glory. Harnessing the nationalistic fervor simmering beneath the surface, he painted pictures of a prosperous, dominant Reich, contrasting it with the perceived degradation of the time. Through impassioned speeches, political maneuvering, and a keen understanding of the public psyche, he began to transform from a mere voice in the wilderness to the leader of a movement. Yet this narrative isn't solely about the politics or charisma of Adolf Hitler. It is also an exploration of warfare's intricate dance. War is not just a demonstration of strength, a rally of troops, or the roar of artillery. At its core, it's an elaborate game of decisions and strategies. Herein lies the lesson, dear reader. Every decision in the theater of war is a double-edged sword. The right move can bring nations to their zenith, while one wrong step can herald their doom. And while many laud victories, understanding failures can be even more instructive. The concept of strategic decisions in warfare is ancient, tracing its roots back to the treatises of Sun Tzu and the campaigns of Alexander the Great. However, during the tumult of the 20th century, it took on unprecedented significance. With technological advancements, the stakes were higher and the game board more intricate. Decisions were no longer about mere territories, but about ideologies, global dominance, and the fate of millions. Adolf Hitler, for all his political acumen, was not immune to the pressures and pitfalls of these decisions. The opening of the Eastern Front serves as a focal point toward this end. What drove him to look eastward, envisioning a vast Lebensraum, a living space for the German people? Was it pure ambition, a strategic imperative, or an overestimation of his own invincibility? But why focus on the Eastern Front? It wasn't just another front or another campaign. It encapsulated a convergence of ambition, strategy, and the harshest elements of nature. It became a theater where ideologies clashed, strategies were tested, and the very limits of human endurance were stretched. The Eastern Front, in many ways, encapsulates the essence of our exploration, the interplay of decision-making, ambition, and the unforgiving realities of warfare. As we embark on this journey, our aim is twofold. First, to shed light on the complex tapestry of events and decisions that defined an era, and second, to understand the man at the epicenter of this maelstrom. Adolf Hitler's story, particularly his strategic choices and the ripples they sent across the world, offers a profound lesson in the gravity of decisions, the weight of ambitions, and the unpredictable dance of fate. So strap in. We're not merely revisiting a chapter from the annals of history. Together, we're delving into a masterclass on strategy, leadership, ambition, and their far-reaching consequences. As the curtain rises on this exploration, remember, while history may be about events, its true essence lies in understanding the minds that shaped them. Welcome to a narrative that promises to be as enlightening as it is riveting. The Anatomy of Decision, Operation Barbarossa, and beyond. Let's take a moment to reflect on something. Decisions. We all make them. From the mundane choices of our daily routines to those life-altering crossroads that define our futures. Now, magnify that personal experience on a global stage with the fate of millions hanging in the balance. That's where Adolf Hitler found himself as he contemplated the vast expanse of the Soviet Union. In the early hours of June 22, 1941, a massive German force began its march eastward. This was Operation Barbarossa, a name that would soon become synonymous with both audacity and catastrophe. The German war machine sought to conquer the vast territories of the Soviet Union and toppled Joseph Stalin's regime. On paper, it seemed like a brilliant strategy. Knock out the massive bear to the east, harness the agricultural and human resources of the Soviet territories, and solidify the Third Reich's dominion over the European mainland. However, the decision wasn't purely strategic. It was steeped in Hitler's long-standing ideological disdain for Bolshevism and his vision of Lebensraum, a desire for territorial expansion to the east. The allure of the Soviet Union's vast resources, combined with Hitler's confidence in the Wehrmacht's prowess, seemed to herald an inevitable victory. But herein lies the first miscalculation. While Germany had seen rapid success in Poland, France, and the Low Countries, the Soviet Union was an entirely different beast. Germany's military strategy was predicated on a swift victory. Blitzkrieg, or lightning warfare, had served them well in the past. The idea was to encircle and destroy large pockets of enemy forces in rapid, coordinated thrusts. But the Soviet Union, with its vast territories, presented a challenge that extended beyond mere distances. The Russian winter, often described in literary circles as a character in its own right, became a formidable adversary. German troops, initially advancing with rapid momentum, soon found themselves ill-prepared for the plummeting temperatures, snow-covered landscapes, and frozen equipment. Images of German soldiers, huddled and shivering, became emblematic of the blunder of underestimating Mother Nature. The supply lines, stretched thin across vast distances, struggled to deliver essential provisions, leaving the front lines starved and vulnerable. But it wasn't just the cold. The logistical challenges of waging war on such an expansive front, with inadequate infrastructure and overstretched supply lines, compounded the problems. As the Wehrmacht pushed deeper into Soviet territory, they faced not just the might of the Red Army, but also the resilience of a populace determined to defend their homeland. While the Eastern Front presented its own set of challenges, the West wasn't without its missteps. Perhaps one of the most significant strategic errors was the air campaign against Britain. The Battle of Britain, as it's now famously known, was a contest for the skies and, by extension, the morale of the British people. Initially, Hitler's strategy seemed to be working. The Luftwaffe targeted British airfields, radar stations, and infrastructure, seeking to gain air supremacy in preparation for a possible invasion, Operation Sea Lion. The Royal Air Force, RAF, was stretched thin, battling against the odds. But, in another twist of miscalculated decision-making, the strategy shifted. Instead of focusing on crippling Britain's air defenses, the Luftwaffe started bombing cities, including the iconic raids on London. This shift, while devastating, allowed the RAF to regroup and rebuild. British morale was galvanized. Every bombed city and every civilian casualty only hardened their resolve. Instead of breaking Britain, the air campaign became a symbol of British resistance. Churchill's words, "Never was so much owed by so many to so few," captured the essence of the nation's resilience. When stepping back and examining these decisions, it becomes evident that while military might and strategic brilliance play their roles, the true essence of warfare lies in understanding nuances. It's about understanding adversaries, the terrain, the weather, the psyche of the civilian populace, and the myriad variables that can shift the balance. In Hitler's pursuit of global dominance, these were the variables, the blind spots, that began to tilt the scales against him. As our exploration continues, remember that behind every headline, every sweeping event, lies a series of decisions, and perhaps therein lie the true lessons of history. The Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe's loss against the Royal Air Force. As the German war machine pressed on with its campaigns across Europe, one could argue that their aerial assault on Britain marked a crucial turning point. High above the rolling English countryside and the bustling streets of London, the drama of the Battle of Britain played out. The Luftwaffe, known for their precision and deadly might, sought to break the backbone of Britain's defense. The Royal Air Force. Day after day, German aircraft swept across the Channel, clashing with the RAF in high-altitude dogfights. Yet, as with many grand grand strategies, it's often the nuances, the slight shifts in focus, that make all the difference. The Luftwaffe began diverting from its primary objective of decimating Britain's air defenses. Instead of pounding airfields and radar stations, there was a strategic change. To break the morale of the British populace by targeting cities, London chief among them. These raids, while devastating and demoralizing to civilians, ironically granted the Royal Air Force a vital reprieve. Every night that Londoners sought shelter from the fury raining down from above, somewhere in the countryside, mechanics worked tirelessly on damaged Spitfires and Hurricanes, getting them airborne again. Pilots, young men who'd become the very embodiment of defiance and hope, were granted brief moments of rest before taking to the skies again. The very decision to shift focus to urban centers allowed the RAF to regroup, repair, and rally. And rally they did, with a determination that would make the Luftwaffe's objective of air supremacy slip further away. But the challenges the Third Reich faced weren't merely in the skies above Britain. As they expanded their footprint, a pattern began to emerge, a pattern of overextension. There's a saying about stretching oneself too thin, and as cliched as it might sound, it held an eerie truth for the German forces. The swiftness with which they advanced, while awe-inspiring at first, became a logistical nightmare. From the icy expanses of Russia, where long supply chains struggled to keep pace with advancing troops, to the deserts of North Africa, where Rommel's Afrika Korps were engaged in their own dance of advance and retreat, the theme was consistent. Resources were stretched, and the once mighty German juggernaut began to show signs of wear and tear. The vast territories they controlled required garrisons and governance, taking troops and resources from the active front lines. Supply lines, a lifeline for any military campaign, became vulnerable. Partisan attacks in occupied territories disrupted communications and transport routes. And with each passing day, as these challenges compounded, the Allies, watching and waiting, began to see opportunities. Every theater of war, every front where the German forces were engaged, was a testament to the challenges of managing a vast war machine. The might and power of the Third Reich, which once seemed indomitable, were being tested. The decisions made, the strategies adopted, and the challenges faced were all beginning to converge, painting a picture of a war that was far from over. And as the world watched, the stakes continued to escalate, with every move on this global chessboard shaping the destiny of nations. Expanding fronts in North Africa, the Balkans, and elsewhere. Picture, if you will, a grand chessboard spanning continents. Each move, whether it's the slide of a pawn or the leap of a knight, reverberates across vast terrain, affecting lives, economies, and entire civilization. For the leaders of the Third Reich, this wasn't just a game of chess, it was their reality, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The allure of North Africa, with its strategic importance, beckoned the German high command. There, the vast deserts became the backdrop for intense warfare. Rommel, the desert fox, with his panzer divisions, made significant advances, capturing the imagination of many and instilling fear in his adversaries. The goal, control of the Suez Canal, a vital artery for British colonial interests. Yet, with every mile the Afrika Korps advanced, the strains of a long supply chain began to manifest. Sand, heat, and distance. These weren't mere inconveniences. They were formidable adversaries in their own right. Now, shift your gaze to the Balkans, a region known for its complex tapestry of cultures and historic rivalries. German intervention. There wasn't just about military conquest, but also navigating a maze of political intrigues and alliances. Greece, Yugoslavia, and the broader region presented both an opportunity and a quagmire. While swift victories were achieved, they came at a cost. Troops that could have been used elsewhere were now embroiled in garrisoning these territories, keeping an eye out for partisan activities and trying to hold together a fragile patchwork of occupied states. Occupation is never as simple as planting a flag and moving on. It requires management, diplomacy, and force. The vast territories now under German control, from the heart of Europe to the edges of Africa, required a delicate balance. The local populations, with their diverse cultures, histories, and aspirations, presented a constant challenge. Every act of resistance, every act of sabotage, and every partisan attack was a thorn in the side of an overstretched German administration. Yet, one could argue that among these strategic miscalculations, an even graver error was brewing, underestimating the very adversaries they sought to defeat. The Allies, though initially caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of the German onslaught, were neither broken nor defeated. Britain, with its vast empire, was not just an island nation, it was a global power with resources and resolve. The United States, though late to join the fray, brought with it industrial might and fresh troops. And the Soviet Union, despite the initial setbacks, was a sleeping giant that was beginning to stir. The Germans, in their hubris, failed to recognize a fundamental truth. While machinery, strategy, and territory are essential in warfare, it's the spirit, resilience, and ingenuity of the people that often turn the tide. The Allies were learning, adapting, and preparing. Their factories were churning out tanks, planes, and weapons at a rate that Germany couldn't match. Their spies and intelligence networks were uncovering secrets and deciphering codes. Their strategists were plotting a comeback. Every front, every theater of war was witnessing a convergence of challenges for the Third Reich. The narrative of an easy and swift victory was unraveling. The world, now deeply entrenched in a conflict of unprecedented scale, was about to witness twists and turns that would shape the course of history for generations to come. The Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe's loss against the Royal Air Force. Imagine an island, proud and defiant, surrounded by waters that have for centuries been its shield. But in a modern age of warfare, where battles were fought just as fiercely in the air as on the ground, those waters became less of a barrier. Britain stood almost alone, facing the might of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force renowned for its prowess and precision. The skies above the English Channel and over the cities and countryside of Britain became a stage for one of the most significant aerial confrontations in history. The Battle of Britain. The German strategy was clear: achieve air superiority and pave the way for a potential invasion. To achieve this, they relentlessly targeted Britain's airfields, radar installations, and the Royal Air Force fighters that dared to defy them. But there's a curious thing about wars and battles. They're not just about firepower or numbers. They're about decisions, some made in the heat of the moment, others the result of long deliberation. The Luftwaffe made one such crucial decision, one that would have far-reaching consequences. Rather than continuing their focus on the RAF and its infrastructure, they shifted to bombing British cities, especially London. There's no denying the devastation these raids caused. Londoners spent countless nights in bomb shelters, listening to the ominous drone of German bombers overhead and the subsequent explosions as bombs found their mark. But this shift in strategy had an unintended consequence. It gave the beleaguered Royal Air Force a much-needed breather. Fighter Command, which had been pushed to its limits, got an opportunity to repair its damaged aircraft and regroup its pilots. What the Germans had hoped would break British morale only galvanized it and gave the RAF the chance it needed to fight back more effectively. However, the challenges for the Third Reich weren't limited to the skies above Britain. As they drove their forces across Europe and into Africa, the sheer vastness of the territories they now sought to control became a problem in itself. Hitler's ambitions, vast as they were, led to a classic military quandary: overextension. Every front opened and every mile gained meant stretched supply lines and the need for more troops to maintain control. From the cold Russian steppes to the hot deserts of North Africa, maintaining momentum and supply became a monumental task. This stretching of resources was akin to a rubber band being pulled from both ends. Effective and formidable when concentrated, the German war machine started to show strain when spread thin. It wasn't just about fuel, ammunition, or machinery. It was about the men who operated them. Troops faced with prolonged campaigns began to tire. Units that had been in continuous combat were not as sharp or effective as they once were. This overextension was perhaps a more subtle error than others, but its impacts were profound. The ebb and flow of war is a complex dance. Strategies evolve and situations change. And as the world watched, it became evident that while the Third Reich had been formidable in its advances, the cracks were beginning to show. The very decisions that had once seemed brilliant were now being questioned, and the tide of war was poised to turn. But how and where that would happen was a story yet to unfold. Disregarding the US's potential for industrial and military output. As events unfolded on multiple fronts, another player was gearing up across the Atlantic. The United States, a nation vast in size and potential, was roused from a posture of relative isolation. While it had been providing support to the Allies, primarily through the Lend-Lease program, the full might of its industry and manpower had yet to be felt. You see, there's this common belief that in times of war, it's just the guns and soldiers that matter. But behind every tank, every bullet, and every plane, there's a factory, a worker, and an entire system that makes it possible. And when it comes to industrial output, few could rival the US. Once the gears of its massive industrial complex were set in motion, the results were staggering. Ships, aircraft, tanks, and weapons. The US was producing them at a rate that was almost inconceivable. The Third Reich, with its European-centric view, failed to fully grasp the implications of this American industrial behemoth. They had significantly underestimated not just the quantity, but also the quality and speed of the American production machine. It was a miscalculation that would cost them dearly. But it wasn't just the material aspect of the war. Strategy, as we've seen, plays a paramount role. The Allied powers, despite facing setbacks, were not static. They were constantly evolving, learning from their mistakes, and, most importantly, coordinating. Joint operations, shared intelligence, and combined strategies were bringing together nations like Britain, the US, and the Soviet Union in an unprecedented alliance. The Germans, on the other hand, had spread themselves thin and were often reacting to situations rather than controlling them. This brings us to another crucial point: leadership. It's often said that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. In the case of the Third Reich, the leadership, especially at the very top, was showing signs of strain. Hitler, with his meteoric rise, had surrounded himself with yes-men. Those who dared to dissent or present alternate viewpoints were quickly sidelined, or worse. This created an environment where decisions were often impulsive. Hitler's micromanagement and his interference in military strategies, often without fully understanding the implications, began to take their toll. Senior military leaders, men with years of experience in warfare, found themselves overruled by a leader whose decisions were increasingly erratic. A case in point was Hitler's insistence on holding every piece of captured territory, even when a strategic withdrawal could have saved many lives and resources. These stand-fast orders, where troops were commanded to fight to the last man, were devastating, not just in terms of lost lives, but also for the morale of the troops. Now, it's easy, with the benefit of hindsight, to point out these flaws. But for the millions caught in this vast whirlwind of war, each day was a battle for survival, a hope for a better tomorrow. The tide was turning, and as it did, the mistakes of the Third Reich became more pronounced, setting the stage for events that would determine the fate of nations and the course of history. The story, my friends, is far from over. Hitler's insistence on making direct military decisions. There's a stark difference between leadership and dictatorship, between taking advice and imposing will. As the war dragged on, this distinction became glaringly apparent within the Third Reich's decision-making echelons. Now, no one can deny the charisma and the force of will that Hitler possessed. It's what enabled him to rally a nation, reshape its politics, and launch it onto the path of aggressive expansion. But war, especially one of the scale of World War II, is an immensely intricate affair. It's a chess game played on multiple boards, each with its own set of rules and dynamics. Yet, as the challenges mounted, Hitler increasingly took on the role of a military strategist, despite having little formal training in this domain. His involvement in detailed military planning and operations, particularly on the Eastern Front, often led to choices that left seasoned military commanders bewildered. There were generals and military minds in the German High Command who had spent their lives studying warfare. Men who understood the nuances of battle, the intricacies of supply lines, and the importance of morale. Yet, they found their advice sidelined, their strategies altered, and their hands tied by directives from the very top. It's not just about battles won or lost. It's about the momentum of a war. When a leader starts overriding his military experts, there's a ripple effect. Troops on the ground sense the discord, and cracks begin to appear in what was once a well-oiled machine. But perhaps one of the gravest errors of the Third Reich, and one with profound moral implications, was their treatment of civilians, encapsulated most horrifically in the Holocaust. This wasn't just a military blunder. It was a crime against humanity on a scale previously unimaginable. Concentration camps, mass exterminations, forced labor, and brutal repression not only exposed the dark heart of Nazi ideology, but also squandered resources and diverted attention from the war effort. The Holocaust, more than just a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, was also a significant strategic misstep. The persecution and systematic extermination of millions required resources, trains, guards, and infrastructure. Resources that could have been utilized in the actual war effort were instead diverted to fuel this dark machine of death. Moreover, the widespread brutality towards civilians in occupied territories, whether in the East, where villages were razed and populations decimated, or in the West, where reprisals and suppressions were commonplace, only fueled resistance movements. The more the Third Reich oppressed, the more enemies it unwittingly created. From the French resistance to the partisans in the East, civilians took up arms, sabotaged German efforts, and provided invaluable intelligence to the Allies. Now, imagine being a soldier, hearing whispers of these atrocities, knowing that each act of brutality only further alienated the very people you were supposedly liberating. It's a heavy weight to bear, knowing that your cause is not just being undermined by strategic blunders on the battlefield, but by profound moral failings at the heart of your nation's leadership. The path the Third Reich took was not just one of military overreach, but of moral bankruptcy. As the war's pendulum began its inevitable swing back, these decisions, these grave mistakes, would come to haunt not just Hitler and his inner circle, but an entire nation and, indeed, the world. And as events unfolded, the cost of these mistakes would become painfully clear. Resource drain of maintaining concentration and extermination camps. War, in its most distilled form, is a game of resources. Each army, each nation, work with a finite set of assets, from the number of boots on the ground to the amount of fuel in its tanks. Understanding this, it's even more baffling to analyze some of the choices made by the Third Reich during the peak of World War II. One of the most significant drains on Germany's resources was the vast network of concentration and extermination camps scattered across Europe. To the casual observer, or to someone detached from the horrifying reality, these camps might seem like a sideshow, a dark corner of Nazi ideology put into cruel practice. But in reality, they represented a massive allocation of resources. Trains that could have been transporting troops or supplies were instead scheduled to deliver thousands of innocent people to their doom. Guards that could have been fortifying the eastern or western fronts were stationed at these camps, ensuring that the machinery of death ran smoothly. These camps, instead of being a source of power or leverage for the Nazis, became an Achilles heel. The sheer logistics of exterminating millions required an immense commitment, a commitment that could have been directed at more immediate and pressing wartime efforts. But the consequences of the Third Reich's dark ambitions went beyond just a misallocation of resources. In every territory they occupied, from the streets of Paris to the villages of Eastern Europe, their brutal reign created an atmosphere of hostility. The vision of a united European front under the Nazi banner was never to be. The Nazis were not liberators, they were oppressors. And in every town, square and behind every shuttered window, resistance brewed. Local populations, initially subdued by the blitzkrieg of the German war machine, began to push back. Sabotage, espionage, guerrilla warfare, every possible form of resistance was employed. Every bullet fired in retaliation, every act of defiance became a thorn in the side of the Nazi regime. Instead of consolidating their power, they found themselves fighting an ever-growing insurgency, draining their resources and attention even further. Moreover, the Third Reich made another critical miscalculation. War, especially a war of this scale, isn't just about troops or territory. It's about logistics and technology. It's about supply lines, efficient transportation, communication, and advanced weaponry. And on this front, the Nazis lagged. While they started the war with a technological edge, that edge dulled as the conflict dragged on. The Allies innovated, collaborated, and brought to bear the full weight of their industrial and intellectual might. In contrast, Hitler's regime, increasingly isolated and paranoid, often clung to outdated tactics and failed to harness the full potential of new technologies. Misunderstanding and underestimating the importance of advancements in warfare, technology proved to be grave mistakes. And so, as the battles raged on, a picture emerged. a picture of a regime that, for all its initial might and ferocity, was being pulled in too many directions, was draining its resources in pursuits that were morally reprehensible and strategically unsound, and was failing to keep pace in the ever-evolving landscape of wartime technology. Failure to invest in long-range bombers and jet fighters. In the expansive tapestry of World War II, the decisions made on drawing boards and in strategy rooms often had ripple effects that could be felt years later on the battlefields. So it was with the Third Reich's choices concerning aviation and resource allocation. War is as much about innovation as it is about strategy. And as the conflict progressed, the skies became a dominant battleground. Here, the Reich's failure to prioritize investment in long-range bombers and jet fighters became glaringly evident. While the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, started the war as one of the most formidable in the world, it soon found itself overshadowed. Consider this: the Allies were making significant leaps in aviation. Their bombers could fly further, carry heavier payloads, and were increasingly better defended against enemy aircraft. These long-range bombers allowed the Allies to reach deep into German territory, targeting infrastructure and manufacturing hubs and disrupting supply chains. On the other hand, the German Air Force's failure to develop and deploy a fleet of long-range bombers of their own meant they couldn't retaliate in kind. The strategic bombings of British and later Soviet cities, as devastating as they were, couldn't match the scope and scale of what the Allies could deliver. And then there were the jet fighters. While the Germans did have jet technology, notably the Me-262, by the time it was introduced, it was too little, too late. Imagine a scenario where the Reich had realized the potential of jet propulsion earlier and had invested significantly in it. The skies of Europe might have looked very different. But again, foresight failed them. And while they did have jets, their impact was minimized due to the timing of their deployment and a myriad of other operational challenges. Now, let's talk resources. Oil, for instance, is the lifeblood of modern warfare. Tanks, planes, ships, trucks, they all run on it. And as the war raged on, Hitler's military ambitions began to outpace the actual resources at his disposal. While the Reich initially managed to fuel its war machine through rapid conquests and taking control of territories with oil reserves, these were often not enough. The vast, stretched-out fronts, the intense aerial battles, and the mechanized divisions all consumed fuel at an astonishing rate. Ignoring the importance of securing a steady supply of oil and other essential resources was another strategic blunder. This negligence put the Nazis in a precarious position. For instance, the lure of the Caucasus oil fields played a role in the push into the Soviet Union. But as we know, that venture did not go as planned. The Allies recognized the Germans' oil dilemma. They systematically targeted refineries, storage facilities, and transport routes, further strangling the Nazi war effort. By not securing these vital resources early on, and by underestimating their importance in sustained warfare, Germany was fighting a war with a ticking clock, each second drawing them closer to a grinding halt.